Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay, that is unanimous. Okay, next up, we have the overview of the Federalism Commission. And we'll turn this over to Nathan Brady, part of our staff, to bring us up to speed on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nathan Brady with the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel. Each of you should have, or you can pick up a hard copy over here on the table. I'm going to share my screen, and for those online, show you where you can find this in the meeting materials. Let me see if I can pull this up. You should be able to see, there we go, our committee page, and this is the Commission on Federalism Commission page. Over here on the right-hand side for this meeting, Tuesday, May 30th at 1 p.m., you've got the Federalism Statutory Authority duties. You click on that document, and it doesn't share, so I'm going to have to reshare that screen, it looks like. There we go. Okay, so just a quick overview of what the Commission on Federalism is tasked with, the duties and responsibilities statutorily. So the authorization for the Federalism Commission can be found in Utah Code Section 63C 4A302. The Commission may meet up to 9 times per year. And all of these sections of code are provided on this page after we've got 2 pages of summary, and then the rest, next 7 pages are the code sections that I'll be referencing for your information. The Commission is tasked with evaluating federal law and developing a curriculum for a seminar on the principles of federalism. And scrolling down, I'll just really quickly hit what those mean. So the evaluation of federal law is primarily what the Commission is doing. The curriculum was developed several years ago, is posted online and available for people to participate and take that seminar, that presentation. But what I won't go over is the criteria for evaluating federal actions. What I will say is that the Commission has authorities to, or statutory requirements to make findings after evaluating a federal law, report to interim committees, work with our federal delegation and federal governmental entities, send written findings of any federal actions that implicate the principles of federalism or state sovereignty, send written findings of those findings to federal governmental agencies responsible for administering the law in question. The Commission can request that the governor call the legislature into a special session to address any findings, and request a written response from a federal governmental entity for a specific time frame to address the Commission's evaluation of a federal action. The standards for evaluation of federal action are pretty lengthy. They can be found in 63C 4A304, and I won't take the time right now to go over those, but I will mention that if any members of the Commission have any questions about those, you can reach out to any one of our staff members from Legislative Research, Bob Reese, Jacqueline Carlton, or myself, and we'd be happy to talk with you about that and try to answer your questions. The Commission is required to report to the Legislative Management Committee regarding any federal law that the Commission evaluates and finds implicates or violates the principles of federalism before taking any action listed in 63C 4A304. Scrolling down, as I mentioned, the curriculum has already been developed, but I would note that Section 63C 4A306 requires a representative of all political subdivisions, all state entities, the Attorney General's Office, and Legislative Research and General Counsel to designate a person to address questions and inquiries regarding federalism, and requires that individual to attend a seminar on the principles of federalism at least once every 2 years. There is an annual report that this Commission is required to provide to the Government Operations Interim Committee and the Natural Resources, Agriculture and Environment Interim Committee every year by November 30th that describes any action taken by the Commission and includes any proposed legislation. On that note, I would note at the very bottom, and I'll talk about this now, this Commission used to have authority to open committee bill files. Those rules were changed 2 years ago so that now there is no authority to open Commission bill files, except for one exception, which is on the State Resource Management Plan, which this Commission heard and took action on last year to open a concurrent resolution and ran that during the last general session. There is authority in 63C 4A305 for the Commission to correspond with similar legislative entities in other states to discuss and coordinate the evaluation of federal laws. There is a requirement to review and make recommendations on the transfer of federally controlled public lands to the state. That can be found in 63C 4A 308. And then to receive reports on public lands from the Public Lands Policy Coordination Office, 63L 11304. I talked about the State Resource Management Plan. That's just the last bullet up here that I accidentally skipped down. That can be found in 63L 11203, subsection 6. And then I referenced that the joint rule was changed regarding opening committee bill files. Other than interim committees, no other commission, task force, or committee is authorized to open bill files unless explicitly or expressly authorized in statute. And then the one exception that we have, again, is what I mentioned, the State Resource Management Plan. With that, Mr. Chair, that concludes my summary.
Thank you, Nathan. Representative Ivory.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Nathan, thank you for going through that. I would note that the standard that we didn't go through and look through, that's the only place that I'm aware of, and I haven't seen anywhere else, that actually lists the powers delegated to the national government in one place. Many people will say that it's Article 1, Section 817 are the powers delegated to the national government, but there are powers in the amendments and powers in, obviously, Article 1 for the president, powers in Article 3 for the courts. But in our code, it's the only place I'm aware of that we've documented all of the powers actually delegated to the national government. And under our system, anything that then is not on that list is reserved to the states. And so that was the utility of that standard that we have in our code, and certainly for people that are concerned about this issue, that's again, the only place I know of where that is there. That's in one place, and then for us to use that as the standard to evaluate the federal actions that we look at.
And Mr. Chair, if I could, again, this is Nathan Brady. That is in this handout that we've provided. Also, it's provided online electronically. If you want to go to code on our website, it's Title 63C, Chapter 4A, Section 304. This is the standard for evaluation of federal law, and as Representative Ivory mentioned, it is rather lengthy and does include all of those references to authorities that are in law for the actions that the federal government can make. It is, again, as I mentioned, rather lengthy. So.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Representative Ivory. Any other comments? Okay, we're going to move some things around on the agenda today to be efficient with our time and those presenting. So we're going to jump down to item 6, consistency and coordination of resource management plans with federal outcomes. We've got Melissa Holyoke from the Solicitor General's Office, Reg Johnson, he's the Director of Public Lands Policy Coordinating Office. Let's just go to that. So Reg and Melissa, time's yours.
Is that on now?
Should be.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair Stratton as well, and committee members. I'm happy to be here today to report a little bit about what the Attorney General's Office is doing and some other issues that have come up. I would like to just quickly give a report on since I was before you, we have filed an action against President Biden relating to the monuments, the Grand Staircase, and Bears Ears Monument. That was filed in August of 2022. It has since, we have since responded to a motion dismissed by the federal government. The briefing has been finished, and we anticipate there will be argument later this summer. We've also been responding to several dozen motions to intervene and challenging some of those orders in that case. Related to the proclamations themselves, there were also some interim management plans that have come out, and we're reviewing those closely. And that has brought us to, and I think what, as Mr. Brady had talked about, was the state resource management plans, which are an important part of the state's public lands management. The state has done an excellent job preparing the state resource management plans and the travel management plans. And I believe it's only Utah that actually have created all of them and using them. There are several federal statutes that require the federal government to coordinate with the state and local leaders, and both to ensure that whatever action the federal government takes, as much as possible with our management plans. The state is seeing less and less coordination, as we would expect and believe is required under the law. We believe coordination with the federal government is a critical component of federalism and is a real issue. And so in coordinating with PLIPCO, we are seeking to identify some of the worst examples of this lack of consistency and coordination and would like to challenge those in court. I believe this is an integral part of our litigation, our public lands management litigation strategy, relates to our monuments challenge, but in and of itself is an important issue with important precedent that regarding what's required of the federal government in coordinating with state and local leaders and in being consistent with our state resource management plans. The legislature created the Public Lands Litigation Program, and the funds have been set aside to use by the Attorney General's office upon the approval of the Executive Appropriations Committee after a report by the Federalism Committee. We are asking you to recommend to EAC that $500,000 of those funds be transferred to the Attorney General's office for this litigation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything to add, Rich?
I think the Solicitor General stated it very nicely, but I will add that thanks to the legislature's wisdom and the executive branch for doing these county and state resource management plans. As Melissa said, we are the only state in the country right now that has all counties in the state plus a state resource management plan. When the governor asked me to be the director of PLIPCO, my first request to my team was that we never send out a comment brief, we call them. These are responses back on land use plans or environmental impact statements or environmental assessments that does not include the goals, policies, and objectives from the county in which the action is taken and from the state plan. And that's been integral in cooperating with our federal partners. And I will say, some of our federal partners' offices are better than others. I got to give kudos to the Ashley National Forest, who's doing their land use plan right now. They've been great to work with, and they've been mostly consistent with our resource management plan. Not completely, but you know, it's been wonderful to have a tool like the resource management plans where we can do cooperative work. On the other side, we've had some of the plans that the solicitor referred to that have not gone well. And that's where we need to draw a line in the sand and say, you know, we are a sovereign and we expect to be treated as one. And that's what we have the resource management plans for. You know, we have a lot of local knowledge that has gone into those resource management plans all across the state. And it's that local knowledge that we think we bring to the that we know we bring to the table. And we hope that our federal partners will start to listen to us a little more. But if that requires litigation on one or two instances, then we hope that that's a direction that we're able to take. And I know our office and I think the Solicitor General are willing to take that on. So thank you.
Thank you. And I just might make a comment as a former local county commissioner and having gone through the resource management plans for the county, I mean, there was a lot of stakeholders and a lot of input, and I think it gives our state a lot of strength in if we're gonna ever have joint management of these public lands, this is where we're gonna go to. This is our playbook. So thank you for your efforts.
Thank you.
Which one you on?
I'm number 13, so you got me there. And I think this commission is important because, again, we're all going to have diverse opinions here on this commission. And I was actually, I want to put this on record, I was at the signing of the Bears Ears and Gran Escalante and then the other event. And, you know, and I agree with that, with the administration of what we're doing. And so I think it's important to note for the public that not all of us here that serve in the legislature see this from the same lens. And it's important to note that when I was there, all the tribal leaders were there too in support of what the federal government did. So I just wanted to put that on record because, again, we're not always going to agree on how we do policy, but that's why we have commissions like this, and I appreciate the work people have put into it.
Thank you. Representative Stratton?
Thank you. Could you explain, Solicitor General, the notion in your segue into the request? You stated that, so we have our resource management plans in place, and there is a requirement for consistency in federal law with local plans. Is that correct?
Correct, that's
Could you
correct.
flesh that just briefly?
Sure, there's several statutes, FLIPMA, one of them I'm sure you're familiar with. There's also NEPA as well as NIFMA, which is the forest statute. But, and all of those require both the coordination, where they get input from the state and local leaders, but some of those require more consistency than others. And in the statute actually require that as much as possible, that the, whatever action that the federal government is taking is as consistent as possible with the state plans, as consistent with federal law.
The issue then, thank you for that response. So by way of background, and we have created these resource management plans, the good point of the minority leader, these management plans have been created, been approved, generally, they've really been from both sides of the aisle. This has been oftentimes close to unanimous in terms of, okay, it's talking not, it's less about who's managing it, but how they're managed and what is done, and whether it's federal or state, it's a management that's in place. And so we went through that process. That was one of, in the beginning, one of the reasons to create these resource management plans. We have 29, as we've said, 29 counties that have put together a plan, resource management plan, and then the state wove all those 29 plans together to come up with our state resource management plan. And so what you're saying as a management plan is put together on, for example, Bears Ears or other places, that there's not the appropriate statutory requirement to be consistent, and so we need to pursue the magnification or enlightenment or shed light on that through the court system. Is that your position?
Correct. And there are two separate issues. One of them is the coordination. What does meaningful coordination mean? Are we just are we actually being engaged in the process and what's required? And then the consistency as well.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Ivory, you have something?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So yeah, this actually came about, we had a visit to Benewah County, Idaho, probably 2013, 2014, and that one county had done their resource management plan, and they were able to, they were mostly forested land and able to use their plan as a standard for forest management. And help me if the way I understand it is, as you mentioned, the counties and then the local entities coordinate. And so the idea is that the federal agencies come in and they're supposed to coordinate consistent with the resource management plans that we've then put in, as Representative Stratton mentioned, every county and then a state resource management plan. And then my understanding is after coordination, if that doesn't resolve all of the issues, or maybe even if it does, that then it's the governor that has the final consistency review, and then he has a kind of a yay or nay on consistency. Is that am I getting that right?
Depends on the federal statute in play, but I think we are looking at several different options, so it would depend on which particular action that we will be challenging as to what was actually required for the process.
Yeah, I'm just
So
trying to
under-
procedurally to understand, because
Yeah,
my understanding was the
FLIPMA-
governor had some role in a consistency determination. Am I missing?
That's under FLIPMA,
Okay.
yes, but if we take action under NIFMA, or if there's an action we pursue under NEPA, which also provide for coordination during their planning processes, the governor's consistency review is not in those statutes, but it is under FLIPMA. So anything that's associated with BLM, that would apply.
Okay. And then just a couple of points into what our good minority leader here was talking about earlier. One of the great things about this commission, and over the years that I've been on it, really, in going through that standard, was the whole question here is where to decide, not what to decide. And that framework of looking at where should that decision be made, rather than I like this decision or I like that decision. And really, this commission over the years has really been able to move largely together, because when one administration may be in, there may be certain that don't like that decision, and then another administration is in, and certain people on the ground don't like those decisions. But what we're really trying to get at is, in general, where should the best decisions be made on things like forest management and land care, and you know, is it those closest to the ground, and you know, where to decide. I think for, as a commission, to really keep that in mind. But so you mentioned a $500,000 request. Could you perhaps break down then what are the specific areas that we've not come to coordination or consistency that we would be putting this money toward?
Well, we're examining several different options, and from those, what we would look at is whatever action that is that we are going to be challenging, and the determination is going to be based significantly on the facts, basically on how much coordination or lack thereof happened in those particular situations. How inconsistent is it with whatever plan we have at issue, travel management, resource management. So we'll be looking at each of those options, and likely focus just on one, maybe two, depending on our analysis. And from there, we will file an action, likely under the Administrative Procedures Act, discussing why there was that lack of process, that lack of coordination, and discussing why whatever action it was violates the Administrative Procedures Act, because it's contrary to law, because it is inconsistent as required under those, whatever statute is that we breed.
Okay, yeah, and I'm not trying to get into litigation, theory or procedure, any of
Trying
that.
to keep it at
No,
a-
absolutely. I'm just trying to get into,
To understanding
do we have forest management issues? Do we have
Yeah.
grazing issues? Do we have?
It could be all of those, and we'll have to be considered, I mean, a lot of these cases also focus on standings, so there's gonna be some areas that we're gonna have to dig into and do some research to prepare the complaint, all of that, and then we'll have to, I'm sure, deal with some motion practice and other things, and that's why, if you're asking about why is the request 500,000, that's why I was
Yeah.
thinking, to get us through the complaint process.
Yeah, and that's really what I was,
Yeah.
looking at is, you know, if
Yeah.
we're making a recommendation to EAC,
Certainly, understanding that.
what does $500,000 do?
Bias,
Is this
yeah.
just a review? Is this preparing a complaint? Is this one area? Is this many areas? Is this one lawsuit? Is it 7 lawsuits? I mean, what does $500,000 do, and what are we going to recommend to EAC that for $500,000 the legislature gets X?
Yeah.
What is
One,
X?
possibly two, but it would likely get us through in the district, through the district court. I would like to see if we could possibly, I would be as efficient as possible to see if I could actually get us maybe even past the district court if we do need to go proceed to the 10th Circuit.
Okay, so if I just summarize then, $500,000 would be to review all of the various coordination, consistency efforts that have been happening over some period of time, and to narrow that, and I'll have the answer was period, and then to narrow that down to the best one or two causes of action, and then initiate that cause of action, and the understanding is we think the 500,000 might get us even through the district court, maybe even through the 10th Circuit.
Correct.
Okay, and then on the various other coordination, consistency that may be under different statutes, as you mentioned, some under FLIPMA, some under the Forest Act, some maybe under NEPA, do we just kind of leave those by the wayside, or is this effort?
No, they would be in tandem. I mean, they would be together. So there's no like individual just cause of action for FLIPMA. So it would be brought via, our challenge would be brought via the APA challenge.
And I appreciate the clarification. So again, I'm just trying to understand then.
Yeah.
So the idea is to pick maybe the best example of not coordinating, not doing consistency review, taking that challenge as representative of
Correct.
basically the whole of coordination and consistency under various statutes, and saying, you're not doing it right, and what's the remedy then at that point?
Well,
Or the
whatever-
potential remedies, again, we haven't
Potential
picked,
remedy, I think it is twofold. One would be whatever action we brought, that individual action would then be reversed, vacated.
Rule or what
Yes,
have you.
Exactly. But then also, it would be building a broader strategy, that like precedent that we could utilize in other cases, including potentially in the Monuments Resource Management Plan or other cases.
Okay.
And so that legal precedent, I believe, is critical for our entire strategy, our public lands management strategy.
Okay, and then
We've
just
seen it.
final, if I may, then, do you have any sense of timing on your timing of, assuming EAC then approves? Any sense of timing on review and filing and that sort of thing? I mean, we can't give the timing on what the other side may do, but timing on our side to get to.
On our side, I would assume immediately. I mean, within the coming weeks, we would start our process in terms of analyzing the claims and be able to file.
Okay, and then filing, I guess, is the key. The time, any idea on timing on those sorts of things? Is that
Similar.
within the
this
year, or?
Yes, yes, well within.
Okay.
I mean, I would anticipate, or I would prefer something that would be in the coming months.
Okay, that's helpful. I mean, we just,
Yeah,
as we
absolutely.
try to figure out what are we recommending,
This is
so.
not as complex as like the monuments case.
Right.
So, I mean, yes, does it require significant, a real dig into the claims and the resources and review of an analysis of it? Absolutely.
Great.
But I see this as more accelerated than that case.
Thank
So if
you.
I can just add to that, one of the benefits we'd like to see in our office is if we do win this lawsuit at the district court and then on up, especially at the district court, is the federal agencies often set their policies and procedures based off of litigation. And so if we win some of these lawsuits, then what we're hoping is that they'll start to coordinate with us more and better and more often and more in-depth. That's what we want, is a strong partnership where we are equals at the table when it comes to the lands inside the state of Utah's boundaries.
So perhaps it could be the Sackett or the West Virginia case for coordination, consistency.
Public
Is
lands.
that kind of,
Yeah.
that's the idea? Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's go to Representative Stratton.
Thank you. So I just like to make a comment before public comment. This commission, my experience in this commission, we have found areas that we work on both sides of the aisle very synergistically. For example, we went through and amended our state resource management plan recently. That was, to my knowledge, fairly unanimous. I know the commission, it came out of the commission unanimous, as I remember. Not to say it's 100%, but it was clearly strong. The majority of both the minority and majority parties supported that. And I would say that that's been the case all the way along with the resource management plan. The unique thing here is this is something of first impression. It's not been, there's not another state that has a resource management plan. There's not another state that has all 29 counties. And so the ask here is, okay, look, what we're trying to do is as we move forward with our action, either at the federal level or state level, let's get on the radar the fact that we have these resource management plans and there's some requirements, consistency and coordination. That's the spirit of it. And what you're doing is you're trying to almost teach a new principle to a vacuum that's been created because of the lack of action on the states. They have not created a resource management plan to coordinate with. And so we have our federal counterparts that are not in the habit, or it's not even on their radar. And so this helps that process. Is that a fair summary?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. We tried to do the resource management plans. Governor Rampton tried, Governor Leavitt tried, and it wasn't until recently, 8 years ago, that we were successful in getting these done. And you make a great point, Representative Stratton. The states have known since FLPMA was passed that these resource management plans would be a valuable partner or a valuable tool to use in this partnership with our federal agencies. But with the exception of a few counties around the West, very few states have really been successful in implementing. Many have tried, but Utah was the first to succeed. So we're anxious to put them to good use and get the most out of them we can.
And now that they've been in place for the time they've been in place, we've had experience that whether they're being a little pat on the head, oh, that's sweet, now we're going to go do what we want to do, or this is really great. You get the whole spectrum, right? And so we need to stand up for and defend ourselves in this case based upon the experience that we're having. Okay, thanks.
And for the investment that the state has put into this. I mean, a significant amount of time and resources into developing these, and this is the next step in making sure that those are defended.
Okay, Representative Romero.
I just have one more comment, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate my colleagues explaining to me what a management plan is, and I've served with them in the legislature since 2013, so I'm very aware of these management plans, and there was another minority leader before me that was heavily involved. But I think it's important when you have conversations even about management plans, that it's okay to have a robust conversation even if we don't agree. So I am appreciative of my colleagues explaining to me what this plan is. I do work in government. I've worked in government for 22 years, so I'm very familiar with local plans that sometimes state government doesn't agree with, and state government sometimes trumps that. So that happens with the federal government too. So I'm looking forward to working with all of you here on this committee, and thank you.
Okay. Let's go to public comment right now and see if there's anybody out there that would like to comment on this topic or the discussion we've had. Okay, there's nobody there, so we'll bring it back to the commission for further consideration or action. Representative Ivory.
Yeah, I'll move that we do make the recommendation to EAC to approve the request of $500,000 for the purpose of reviewing and selecting the best case to deal with the coordination consistency practice pursuant to federal law. Is that close to the motion? Would you add anything to that?
No.
Okay.
I would add one thing, is that means that the chairs will have to go and present to AEC. Or we could delegate it to somebody else, but.
And we
okay.
anticipate you'll represent as well. Anyway, that's the motion.
All right, discussion to the motion. Seeing none, call the question then. All those in favor of the chairs going to the Executive Appropriations Committee and presenting this for authorizing the funds. Since we already have the funds, we have to go through them. So that's the motion. All of those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, let's do a roll call vote then. Okay, your mic's on, go ahead.
Senator Hinkins,
Aye.
Kwan, Owens,
Aye.
and Representatives Albrecht,
Aye.
Ivory.
I just want to kind of explain on this. This is really just, this is the federal law, and we're simply just, this is the federal law, this coordination and consistency, and we're simply just asking and requesting the review that they follow the law to be consistent with our plans. And I guess as a House member, we don't explain our vote, but I like to pretend I'm a senator in this meeting, and I'll vote aye.
And Representative Romero.
No, but can I explain my vote too? I understand the process, and I'm still a no.
Oh, those are the chairs. Chair Stratton,
Yes.
and Chair Winterton.
Yes. Okay, I rule that that passes 6-2.
Could I make a request of the chairs?
Just a second. Let me finish this up. That we have Representative Romero and Senator Kwan as no's. The rest are affirmative for the motion. Representative Ivory.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just request that as you do go to EAC, that we get kind of some timelines, some mileposts in place. We request that we have some kind of ways to track both the timing and the deliverables.
Yeah, that would be good. All right, so that passes. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
All right. Now let's go back to Item 3, overview of House Bill 253, Federalism Commission amendments that was passed in our 2023 general session. And we'll go to Jacqueline Carlton for this update.
Hi, yes, I'm Jacqueline Carlton. I'm an attorney with the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel. And as mentioned, HB 253 passed in this most recent session. The bill really does two things. First, it requires the commission to provide an annual report to each interim committee concerning any law or action by the federal government that implicates the principles of federalism or state sovereignty. And it also allows the commission to notify the appropriate interim committee also on any law or action by the federal government implicating principles of federalism or state sovereignty. And that's just kind of the two things the bill does, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the commission has.
Okay. Are there questions for Jacqueline? Seeing none, thank you. Representative Ivory, you were the, oh, okay. Okay, I didn't know if Representative Ivory had anything else to add to this since he was the sponsor of the bill on 253.
Yeah, actually, that came from Representative Moss, and so I just kind of carried it for him. The idea was that, you know, federalism really is a team sport. This idea of should we decide transportation issues in Utah or Washington? Should we decide education issues in Utah or Washington? And that really is a team sport among our various legislative committees, and so the idea was to begin coordinating with the other interim committees on creating and implementing that plan, and I think that'll kind of be a little more clear as we get to the that plan discussion later in the agenda.
Okay,
Let me just ask,
Representative Stratton.
on the changes there, council, we talked about report to each interim committee on subject matter related to that committee. Is that correct? It talks about?
It doesn't say necessarily. What it says is that provide an annual report to each interim committee.
Okay.
So I think that could be interpreted as one report provided to each interim committee. But the commission also has the ability to just go to each interim committee with a specific action that they can
Okay.
notify them.
All right. Thank you for the clarification.
Representative Ivory.
Thank you. I could probably maybe add a little bit to that. That yeah, the report could be a written report out to the other committees, and I think as we get to that other item, when we spoke with the Speaker and the Senate President and their chiefs of staff, that rather than boil the ocean and try to get all of the various committees all doing, you know, this federalism work, that we pick a few areas and focus and try to focus in on those committees. So perhaps the written report to most of the committees, but then the few that we select to begin working with, that maybe we coordinate a little more directly. So, and again, that may come out as we look at that plan in the other item.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? All right, let's move on down now to number 4, Federalism Policy Tracker. We have the commission that will receive an update on the Federalism Policy Tracker, and we've got Sam Hill from Utah Valley University here. Okay. Okay, Sam, if you'll unmute and introduce yourself, we'll turn some time over to you.
Thank you very much. My name is Samuel Hill. I am Senior Researcher on the Federalism Index Project here at UVU. And I have been asked to present our report to you. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to report to you, and we are grateful for your support. As I will show in the presentation coming up, that support is bearing fruit not only within the project itself, but around the nation, around the world. First, I would like to make a couple of points on a budgetary nature to report to you. Our general approach has been thus far to work backwards from the provisional total of $83,000 of legislative funding. Over a 12-month period, that translates to roughly $6,900 per month. Our initial invoice covered 6 months of work from July 1st to January 15th. We received payment for the first invoice in spring, roughly $39,000. We have not yet sent a second invoice, which covers all the work done from January 15th, 2023 until today. If we sent that invoice today, we would estimate a request of around $34,500, and that's just an estimate. This means that for the remainder of the funding year, there should be around $10,000. Dr. Bibby and I have been in Africa for about the past 2.5 and 3 weeks, so we have not been invoicing hours. Johanna Linford has been managing the website, the policy tracker, and communications during that time. And so as an item of business, we ask for approval to send this second invoice as soon as possible. So that's my note on budgets. And if there are any questions, I don't know, is this a good time to stop for that, or shall I keep going, chairs?
I don't see any hands up or any lights, so go ahead and continue.
All right, thank you so much. Now to some updates on the Federalism Policy Tracker. We have put it through a complete overhaul, and it's worked actually quite well, well enough that we were recently featured by the Center for the Study of Federalism, which is the largest academic resource for federalism studies, at least in the United States. This recognition indicates that not only the expansion of the capabilities of what we're providing, but also the seriousness of our project, in that we are now viewed as a viable resource for the leading scholars on federalism. As a part of this update, we have focused on 3 primary areas. The first is one of usability. With the addition of a proprietary code built specifically for our needs, the tracker now features table drop-downs, parent-child roles, a number of technological improvements that are sort of the standard for search engines and websites such as this. And I will take you through that just shortly. We also have searchability. The new policy trackers features an instant search function with very easy access to outside links, news articles, social media posting. And we have recently added the ability to directly embed the website links to bills and policy and other actions. And finally, visibility. As part of our efforts to involve state and interstate organizations, we now publish a monthly newsletter. The main function of this newsletter is to draw attention on social media and drive traffic to the tracker, while also serving as a real-time log of the year's significant federalism-related events. And if I may, I would like to share with you briefly just a little test drive of the policy tracker as it currently stands. So if you come to our website at federalismindex.org/ I actually can't see it because it's behind the control panel, but it's right here on the top. You can see it. If you come here, we have the ability to search by the committees that are implicated. You have the ability to search depending upon how recently the topic has been added, and you can also search by keyword. And so in the last 30 days, major House issues are the Multiple Firearms Sales Reporting Modernization Act of 2022. But then if we switch to all, we can have everything that's come through since about mid-2021 as far as activity that involves the House. Excuse me. And I apologize, I've managed to lose it. There we are. Okay, another thing that's we've been able to incorporate with this new coding is something called parent-child rows. So if you want to look at House Bill HR 1280 or 1280, you click on it. It will tell us the status of the legislation. It will give you a brief argument over federalism implications that we take from experts in the field, and then it will also give you sources for both the original legislation and the source of our commentary. Yes, so we can also search, as you can see up here at the top, by activities by the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. Clear that out. These updates represent a really significant step forward in terms of usability, in terms of ease, because previously the searches would take a very long time, and our access to the information was often quite inconsistent based on the website. So this is a huge step forward for us. Now, in the future work going forward for the next few months, we're going to begin working on applying these same updates to our state actions tracker. Our goal is to have this completed by the end of June. The initial updates to the main policy tracker took us almost 2.5 months, but thanks to our experience with that and our working with our coders, we anticipate that this will go very smoothly. Could be done in as little as 2 weeks, but at the very least by the end of June. The other steps we're taking are to, in conjunction with the state actions, are to begin communication and outreach with the state legislatures and other interstate organizations. Now that the tracker is reliable, easy to use, and frankly available around the world, we're going to be communicating with all 33 of the federalism committees in every state where they exist. And we're also in the process of looking for outlets to help publicize the tracker at think tanks and partner organizations, both on our own campus and campuses around the country. And yeah, that's where we're at. That's what we're doing. If there's any questions that I can answer, I will happily take them. If there are any I cannot answer, I encourage you to reach out to Director Bibby. He is on his way home right now from Africa, and so he'll be available relatively soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to Representative Ivory.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sam, thank you so much for the work that you all have been doing. This has been a project that's been in the works for a number of years, and for the committee, we appropriate, I think it's $80,000 a year on this, and the work that we're getting out of UVU and their students is really phenomenal. The ability to then go into that tracker and track any issue real time to look at is the federal government invading into areas that may be the purview and jurisdiction of the state is just something that absolutely never existed before. And to try to understand where we are on that line of scrimmage. Sam, I'd ask you, as we're going to get later in the agenda on a plan, but one of the areas that the speaker has asked us to really focus on from a federalism perspective is water. If we were to look at water on the tracker and what are different ways that we could maybe use the tool to understand where the federal government is perhaps intruding or impinging on the jurisdictional line relative to water.
Helps if I unmute. Thank you, Representative Ivory. Looking at the tracker right now, we have 2 issues of water. One of them is only five days old. And this is a ruling that is designed to narrow the regulatory reach of the Environmental Protection Agency and provide more latitude for states to define and determine the boundaries of local wetlands. So
have you narrowed down? I just typed in water in the search box and I've got I've got,
I apologize. I still had it on judiciary, so that's just the judiciary, yes.
okay.
And of course, you can sort, if you look to the right side of the page there, by last action date. And if you want to sort that there, you will see 1, 2, 3 actions just since the beginning of this year, and that court case coming in just 5 days ago, in addition to the Waters of the United States multi-state lawsuit in February and the joint resolution from the House.
So Sam, one of the questions that came up previously in this commission was, how do you choose the items that go on this list, whether it has federalism implications or not? How do you determine what that is to include the items on this list or not include items on the list?
So the first thing that we do is very just, I suppose you could say, non-scientific. We all go hunting and looking for things in the news. We look at the congressional websites, judiciary websites, and just bring everything in, casting a very wide net. The next thing that we do is we go through websites from think tanks, law centers, academic research papers, activity on the news media, anything that's drawing a lot of fervor. And so we go through and we assess which of these things are, number one, securely in the federalism implications wheelhouse. And then we prioritize those things that fall under things like economically significant rules, or that are happening in multiple different states, or that have a multi-state impact. And we simply prioritize from there with the time that we have. But we do not rely solely on our own expertise. We really do make sure that anything that we're publishing does come with the additional analysis from other academic, policy, or legal organizations.
Thank you.
Okay. Representative Stratton.
Thank you. Thank you for the work, and this has really been an exciting project, and appreciate the work of the constitutional studies and all that's Professor Bibby and yourself on all that's been done here. As to the segue in, you talked about an approval to send an invoice. We need actually, when we have the money set aside, but when it's a government to government transfer, we need to have a contractual agreement put together. So we need to get that in place, and then we can receive that invoice and get it paid. So we'll just invite our council to integrate, and if you can reach out to each other and work on getting that documented and properly, the T's crossed, the I's dotted. At this point, that would be our next step in order to process invoices. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I will talk to Dr. Bibby, and then I assume you mean counsel for the commission?
Yes.
Okay.
We have Council Carlton, Council Reese, yes.
All right.
Okay.
I'll forward that on to Dr. Bibby. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. So if I understand right, there's no action to be taken at this time. We'll wait for an invoice, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Well, yes.
And-
Correct.
All right. So moving on to item,
Question, Mr. Chair.
yes, sorry, go ahead, Representative Albert.
So thanks, Sam, for the presentation. You've come a long way since that first meeting when I asked you questions a couple of years ago, but it's a great source. I've been on the website several times, and I think you answered where you got information just a minute ago to Representative Ivory. My question would be, as you expand this to include the 33 states that have federalism commissions, do you plan to include on this tracker any legislation that those states may pass in their sessions having to do with federalism issues?
I can only kind of give you the provisional answer simply because this is kind of a nascent project, but ideally, we would be able to track not only issues with federalism implications, but also legislation taken similar to the enabling legislation for the commission that specifically addresses federalism and balances of power. Our hope is to make this as comprehensive. Dr. Bibby uses the term one-stop shop for questions about federalism in the United States. So we would hope to be able to include all of that activity. And this is also one of the reasons why our current strategy is to work with the other states, agencies and entities so that we can draw on their resources instead of having to draw on our own here in Utah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Representative Irie.
Yeah, just in response to Representative Albrecht, if you look at the tracker and go down to the state action part, it seems to be current as of March 16th. And so there's Washington state legislation that was passed, Idaho legislation, Montana legislation in there that relates to federalism. So, you know, they seem to be, despite being in Africa for the last month, that's probably the lag to March 16th. They seem to be staying pretty current, even with the state legislation, Representative. I agree with you. I think they've come a long way.
Thank you, Representative.
Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none. Thank you, and we'll move on to item number 5. This is the Bureau of Land Management proposed rule, and we'll invite Reg Johnson back up, and this is Cole. Okay, we got several here that I think will be joining us. Reg might have an idea who they are, otherwise we'll call them.
Okay.
So we got Grace Bellon,
Bologna, thanks.
and Cole LaCoy, and they're from John Curtis's office and Mike Lee's respectively. So let's go ahead and turn it to Reg.
Can I ask for a point of personal preference for just a moment before we get started? During our last discussion over consistency review and coordination, I failed to introduce some of my staff who have done a lot of the work on this, and I'd like to take a moment to recognize the people who really do the work in my office. We have 2 legal interns and the state planner, so Tess Peterson, Haley Kendall, our 2 interns over here from the U, who've been doing a lot of great work for the office, and our planner, Dylan Hoyt, who has been doing a lot of work on the resource management plans. He's done the updates for you in the last few years and does great work. So I just wanted to recognize them and thank them for all the great work that they do. So sorry to my other panel members for taking that moment out of your time, but thank you for the time there. So to kick off, this conservation rule, as it's been calling, or the BLM proposed rule on conservation and landscape health, we're calling it the BLM public lands rules, et cetera, but it's going to basically fundamentally change FLPMA for multiple use and sustained yields and add conservation as part of the rule. This was not intended when FLPMA was passed. There was nothing in there that calls out a conservation rule, as it says. There is language in FLPMA that talks about the need for protecting the landscapes and things like that. But to change the rules this significantly through an administrative action is very concerning to our office. This is particularly concerning in Utah, where approximately 10.1 million acres of Utah's 22.8 million acres of BLM are already under strict land use designations. So on the landscape right now, we already have wilderness study areas, lands with wilderness characteristics, areas of critical environmental concerns. We have national monuments, and those are just BLM rules or BLM land designations. Now,
Director, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Jared,
Anytime.
could you give that figure again? How many acres?
So we have about 10.1 million acres that are under federal designation. And there's about 22 million acres of BLM land.
That's heightened care and
Heightened care.
with either a
heightened
proposed wilderness area or
federal
wilderness
designation.
or whatever. And
Yeah.
that, in perspective, then the 10.1 would be roughly 20% of our whole state. So 2 of
Right.
every 10 acres, correct?
Yeah, correct. And then that does not include our national parks, and that does not include Forest Service, Forest Service is a separate designation. A lot of people don't realize that, but it is public lands, but it was a federal reserve, so it's a little more restrictive than BLM lands even. Now, on top of the federal designations that we have, you also have all of the acts that a general mining claim would have to go through, oil and gas leases have to go through, grazing rules have to go through, or grazing leases, right? So you have the Archaeological Protection Act, you have NEPA, there's 5 or 6 other acts, federal acts that every time there's a proposed action on the open lands, the multiple use lands, those still have a full layer of protection on top of them. What the Conservation and Landscape Health Rule proposes is even more additional restrictions on top of those on the lands that are supposed to be open for multiple use. So really what we're looking at, all told, would be the entire BLM portfolio of lands, which when the BLM was formed was supposed to be open multiple use, grazing, mining, right? These were not lands that were set aside as parks or set aside as Forest Service reserve lands. And so those are the properties that a lot of local rural communities really rely on, whether you're talking oil and gas, critical minerals. Even recently with the sage-grouse planting rule, we're looking at limiting renewable resources on these landscapes through ACEC. So we're looking at no solar production, we're looking at no wind power, we're looking at even no geothermal in these areas because they would have a conservation lease proposed for them. We're preparing a very detailed comment brief, which is due June 30th. I think we've shared with many of you and all of the counties some of the comments that we have put together, a brief, I think it's only 4 or 5 pages, but the detailed comment letter will probably be in the 30 to 40 page comment brief, and that's to let the federal BLM know exactly where the state of Utah stands on that. A few specific things on the landscape health rule. BLM would be required to inventory quote-unquote intact landscapes all across Utah, and potentially manage those intact landscapes to protect them from activities that would impair their intactness. This is concerning to us because if you look at what's left of the multiple use sustained yields lands, that 10 point whatever million acres that's left, or about 13 million acres that's left that are not in federal designations. Most of those are intact landscapes. You might have a dirt road that goes across there, you have a 2-track road that goes out to dispersed camping, but for all intents and purposes, all these roads or all these areas are still intact landscapes. So what that would do is require BLM field offices here locally to manage those and remove any uses that might impair those intact landscapes. Now, they don't identify what those rules are going to be, the new rules, but they would be required to protect those. Intact landscapes are defined as an unfragmented ecosystem that is free of local conditions that could permanently or significantly disrupt, impair, or degrade the landscape structure or ecosystem resilience, and that is large enough to maintain native biological diversity, including viable populations of wild, ranging species. Intact landscapes have a high conservation value, provide critical ecosystem functions, and support ecosystem resilience. Now you can see with that kind of broad language how any intact or how any landscape in some of these rural counties are going to be considered an intact landscape and be managed accordingly. It's particularly troublesome for counties like Wayne County or Garfield County, which are 94 or 95% public lands. Imagine a county, if you live in Salt Lake County, imagine trying to operate on 3% of your private property tax revenue. Makes it really difficult to provide critical services, hospitals, et cetera. It's also concerning to us because it's a bit of a affront to our wise stewardship over the past 150 to 200 years that we've been in this area and have been wise stewards of these lands. We have not had permanent impacts and caused adverse impacts in a lot of these areas. And since we've been such good stewards of the land, we're now being told that we can no longer steward these lands and that the BLM is going to take over and do it under a different rule. So another area that we have some concerns with. Speaking of areas with concerns, areas of critical environmental concern, or we call them ACECs in the trade. They've been used, these ACECs have been used throughout the state, but in the past they've been very limited. 100 acres here, 1,000 acres there. What we're looking at now are some very large landscape scale ACECs. Right before this meeting, I was on with BLM talking about sage-grouse planting, and we were looking at tens of thousands of acres in ACECs just for sage-grouse. Through our efforts at the PLPCO office, I think we're back to maybe a few tens of thousands of acres in Rich County and Box Elder County. Most of the ones in the central Utah area have been pulled back, but that plan's still not done, and we'll see where that goes. But these ACECs seem to be going broader and broader across the landscape, and that's a real concern for us. The proposed rule would encourage the expanded use of ACECs. The BLM would require an inventory to protect ACECs and consider managing those potential ACECs as de facto until they go through their land use planning process. Conservation leases are also proposed in the land use process, or in the proposed rule. This would allow BLM to issue conservation leases to businesses, individuals, nonprofit organizations, et cetera. Ironically, states and counties do not appear to be ones that could hold conservation leases. Once issued, these other activities would not be allowed on leased lands where they would be inconsistent with the purposes of the conservation lease other than casual uses. So a little concerning with this rule, and we're working diligently to address some of these concerns and happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Let's see. Let's go on. I don't see any, well, Representative Ivory.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Reg, you've been around this territory for quite a long time, fair to say.
Yep.
Maybe like all your life.
Pretty much.
Do environmental impact statement, is that being discussed at all with this?
It's not, no. It was rolled out, they said there would be no significant impacts that come with it, which is, I disagree with that. I think there will be some significant impacts that come with this rule, and that's one of the comments that we have put together, is that this should have gone through an EIS process.
So what if, just sitting here, and not to put you too much on the spot, what kinds of things do you think would pop up, would surface in an environmental impact statement, economic impact statement?
You just hit it right there, right? There are a lot of local impacts, local environmental impacts, and also local economic impacts that could occur from this rule. We don't know what conservation leases could do to the landscape. We have a lot of areas where we've unfortunately did fire suppression for 100+ years, and the unintended consequences of that were high fuel loads. Those are the kind of things that an environmental impact statement should analyze, right? We should analyze what is a conservation lease really going to do to a landscape when you block it up because one group wants to manage their lands in a specific area. We don't allow that with grazers to manage for sole use. We don't allow that with these lands are for multiple use, and they shouldn't be reserved for one simple use because one group wants to do that.
That really was kind of the selling feature of at least to get enough votes, was this multiple use sustained yield that even preceded FLPMA and all of the others, right? I mean, that goes
Right.
back into the 60s and whatnot. But so search and rescue, watershed restoration initiative, the ability to keep the forest healthy so we have water flowing. I mean, does that?
Those could all be impacted.
Right, and then what you mentioned earlier with coordination and consistency, something like this should historically have tied into coordination and consistency, should it not?
It should, and during the, if this were going through an EIS or a planning process, then the state and local governments would have a chance to sign up as cooperating agency, something we didn't really discuss earlier. But, we sign an MOU with our federal partners to go in depth on some of these issues and to bring local knowledge, whether that be at the local government level or the state level. We have expertise at both levels of government, and we're able to bring those to the table and have in-depth discussions about what the impacts could be locally, as a state, as a region. I work with the Western Governors Association on a number of these issues, and yeah, it would be much better to have this go through an EIS process.
So you're saying those local impacts, state impacts, economic emergency, any of the, there was no coordination, none of that was taken into account?
We have the opportunity to do public comment, but we are just the same as anybody else. Our comments are not given any more weight, or we don't have any more coordination than anybody else on the street right now, or any other group, which, FLIPMA, which is the BLM, specifically calls out that we are supposed to be coordinated with on local land use plans. They're calling this as not a local land use plan, but it will affect every single land use plan in the state. So it's a little disingenuous that they say it's not a land use plan when this is the rule that will direct all the land use plans.
Let me ask you just one example then. So there's a push by the administration to do wind and solar, and that's going to require increasing transmission lines substantially. I mean, doubling, tripling, perhaps, transmission lines. What would this sort of thing, particularly in a state like Utah that's 63% federally controlled, what would that do just to delivering power?
So, I mean, all depends on where these conservation leases or where the intact landscapes are identified. And that's why we should go through an EIS, because we don't know. And we should go through an EIS to identify, what areas are you calling an intact landscape? What areas are you calling for conservation leases? And then if those overlay areas where we know we need new transmission lines, for example, we have one of the best geothermal reserves in the entire country in our West Desert. And what we're missing is transmission lines from the geothermal pools to IPP or some place that we can, put that power on the grid and send it out. So if these lands are, and most of those lands out there are quote unquote intact landscapes. So if we have to manage for those, then we can no longer put in transmission lines, or at least it will be much, much more difficult. If we look at the Trans-West line that just took us 18 years, and we did not have these kind of hoops to jump through, if it's going to take us 25 years, I mean, that's going to heavily impact geothermal in that West Desert area.
That's a good point. Representative Albrecht, got your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is so all-encompassing that every legislator on both sides of the aisle should oppose this. Not only grazing, hunting, but the Native Americans, their wood gathering, their pine nut gathering, camping, biking, mining, energy. There are so many facets that this conservation and landscape health rule, it would totally, I'm thinking, let's just talk about the San Rafael swell, the areas that were not included in the Emory land trade, all of that BLM land, heavily used by recreationists of all sorts. I've been out there. My dad used to have uranium claims out there. I've been out there when Native Americans were gathering wood from dead pinyon trees. So this is something I think we all should be concerned about on both sides of the aisle, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this would be a good place to jump in and hear from our federal delegation. So with that, let's go to Congressman John Curtis's office. We've got Grace there. If you want to unmute and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Grace Balone with Congressman Curtis in DC. I handle his energy, environment, ag, public lands portfolio. He's on the Energy and Commerce Committee and also the Natural Resources Committee. So both committees that handle these issues we are on, which has been helpful, especially in times like these. One of the things we're working on in this space, the congressman introduced a bill that, if passed, would make President Biden pull this rule. So that's kind of a one-stop shop should it move. The Natural Resources Committee itself is very, very invested in the bill not happening. They've been very active. They're pulling together hearings. They're pulling together letters. I think as much as you guys can amplify those sentiments, which Reg, we're grateful for what y'all are doing. That's really helpful from this side. And then just in general, as much as you can shout out that there's no meeting in the state of Utah, every other state that this will majorly impact has a BLM hearing, public comment, town hall type meeting. So I think to what degree that can be amplified as well would be super helpful. But with that, I'll pass it to Cole.
All right, go ahead, Cole. You're from Senator Lee's office.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Really want to reiterate a lot of what Director Johnson said. One major concern that I have is the mitigation component of this rule. If you dig into it and look at kind of the proposed requirements that may occur, you see that any activity that may have some sort of impact on an intact landscape may be required to pay for or take on a conservation lease of their own. So, if you're an oil and gas driller and you apply to use a portion of land, a lease for oil and gas, under this rule, you might be required to take on a conservation lease as well to mitigate the impacts of your activity, which is authorized under FLIPMA. And so I'm obviously worried about companies, being able to swoop in and lock up acres and acres of land and prevent the public from being able to access it for authorized uses like timber harvesting or natural resource development and things like that. But I'm also really worried that the structure of this rule may cause our public land users to be forced to pay for it as well. I mean, the way the rule is structured, I think that our oil and gas operators, our timber harvesters, all those different folks could be required to take on these conservation leases as a condition of their use of public land and end up being the ones having to pay and kind of facilitate the locking up of our land. So that's something that's really scary to me. I would say additionally, the rule contemplates, well, it doesn't explicitly contemplate it. There's a portion in it that where the BLM asks for public comment, public feedback on a consideration, specifically whether or not carbon credits should be an explicit feature of the rule if it is finally promulgated. That's worrisome to me because carbon credits are not very well structured right now. And quite honestly, so for instance, a lot of folks want to issue carbon credits in order to prevent timber harvesting on federal land, right? But if they really understood the economics of the forest, they would understand that if you want to sequester a lot of carbon on federal land, you would harvest mature trees and allow rapidly growing young trees to take up that space, sequester a bunch of carbon. but that's not the way that I think these folks are intending to use carbon credits. I think what they'll say is, oh, we're going to issue a conservation lease here. A company like Patagonia could come in and say, oh, we're going to purchase this conservation lease, which will produce carbon credits and will offset our carbon footprint. It won't have the desired or proclaimed impact of actually reducing carbon because they aren't allowing that carbon to be harvested off the land in the form of timber. And they are able to claim that credit and also lock up the land from other productive uses. So in short, a lot to be concerned about. Senator Lee has co-sponsored the companion version of the House rule or the House bill, which would nullify this proposal. But obviously for that to actually come to pass, the president would have to sign it, which he isn't going to do. So I think the timing of this rule, I think it makes it hard for them to complete it by the end of the administration, though it is possible. I think the next election is going to be a big consideration in whether or not this actually gets implemented. And then ultimately, I think we're going to have to rely on some of our big public lands groups to litigate and really push the boundaries of whether or not this is a truly authorized rule under FLIPMA.
Well, thank you. All right, we do have a light from Representative Romero.
Mr. Chair, I just had a question for the director. What is this rule again? Because I'm not as familiar as others are with it, so I can do some extensive reading
Sure.
this weekend.
There's lots to read there. The BLM's proposed rule on conservation and landscape health.
And maybe I could set up a time to meet with you and your staff.
Be happy to.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And then, Mr. Chair, a question for the representative from, I think, Representative Curtis's office. So the BLM has scheduled hearings on this in surrounding states, but not in Utah. Is that correct? Is that what I heard? Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. I will make a call to the White House, and so let's see if we can get something here in Utah. I make that
Thank you.
commitment right now.
That would be great.
Okay, I was going to say, if you would like that reading material, the staff will send that out to you.
I would love staff to send extensive reading material for me this weekend, and then I will set up a time, probably in 2 weeks, to meet with you in your office. But
That'd be great.
I will get on the email and phone to my contacts in the White House, and just want to remind everyone there are members in this body, in this legislature, that do have direct lines to the White House, like others had in previous administrations. So don't hesitate to utilize some of us. I just came from DC and the Vice President's house this past weekend, so I just want you to know, utilize me, and I'll do whatever I can on my end.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Representative.
I have to wait till the weekend because I got other work to do.
Okay. Representative Ivory, I have you down. Do you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me keep the mic off there, but let me see if I can do a share screen. There we go. Okay. Yeah, just to try to pull this together, we've been following this for quite some time. That's the wrong one. Let me get. Let's get that out of there. There we go. Yeah, we've been following this for quite some time, and so this whole notion of 30 by 30 and decarbonization, and then something else popped up in the discussion called natural asset companies and natural asset accounting that I think kind of lead into this rule that just a walkthrough might be helpful. Leading into the administration, there were a number of organizations pushing for what they called 30 by 30, and then they openly said that the real goal, so 30 by 30 was to protect, to lock up, if you will, 30% of all U.S. land and water by 2030, and then they've said that the real goal is 50 by 50, to put these controls on 50% of all land by 2050, and they gave this plan to the president. It's online, you can see it, the Climate President Action Plan, and it called for him to issue orders for these various things. And his first executive order was this 1408, tackling climate crisis at home and abroad. And sure enough, in the executive order, conserve 30% of all land and water by 2030. And then we see that in Utah, many of these groups are looking at the Bears Ears and the Red Rock Wilderness as part of this 30 by 30 effort. So also in the executive order was to a carbon pollution-free electricity sector, clean zero emission vehicles, pause all oil and gas leases, and increase royalties. All of that has happened just since the new administration. This is Speaker Pelosi. I don't know if this will come across, but she was talking about this bilateral infrastructure bill regarding these things. And
what we have done. This is a nearly $1 trillion investment in Build Back Better and bipartisan infrastructure framework. Recognizes the interconnectedness of climate change and gender justice, and enables women and girls to lead a just transition to a clean energy economy of the future. Our legislation advances our mission to decarbonize and realign every sector of the economy.
And so the speaker was talking about decarbonizing and realigning. I'm not seeing how to turn that off here. Yeah, I'm not seeing it. Is that better? Oh, there we go. Is that better? Yeah. So they talked about decarbonizing and realigning every sector of the economy to catch up. Then following that, there was another executive order that the president issued, 14030, to require the social cost of greenhouse gas for all procurement decisions, any bid proposals, and then any benefits from the federal government. So loans that were federally backed, FEMA, any of that sort of thing, to consider the lowest cost of greenhouse gas. And then the federal government in the rollout plan, the roadmap says the federal government was the world's largest purchaser of goods and services, and it would use that power to strategically shape the markets. Well, then President Biden talked about what they wanted to do with this effort.
You have to set sort of guide rails down now. So between the years 2021 and 2030, it's irreversible, the path we've set ourselves on. And one of which is doing away with any subsidies for fossil fuels, number one. Number two, holding them liable for what they have done, particularly in those cases where you're underserved neighborhoods and you know the deal, okay? And by the way, when they don't, when they deliver it, we put them in jail. That's what I'm not joking about this. I'm not joking about it.
And so they talked about making this irreversible and then criminalizing use of fossil fuels. They looked at the asbestos, tobacco, opioid model of doing criminalizing the use of fossil fuels, and then to reject what they called any false solutions proposed by polluters. So cap and trade, carbon sequestration, waste to energy, biomass, nuclear power. Also in the executive order, they talked about a government-wide approach to deal with this effort. And in the government-wide approach, then all of the agencies now have their plans under the 14008 and the 14030, including the Defense Department, the Commerce Department, the Energy Department, but then particularly the SEC had their rolled out plan to deal with the tackling the crisis, the carbon sequestration, the decarbonization, the 30 by 30. And as we know, their plan rolled out to have the disclosure of all tier 1, 2, and 3 financial-related climate impacts, and that would then take in virtually every company in the United States. So also part of the 14008 was to establish the Offices of Environmental Justice, and they mention the executive order to then implement these, to create the Environmental Justice Initiative. They've got the Environmental Justice Scorecards to implement this government-wide, nationwide decarbonization. So then in September of 2021, the New York Stock Exchange, with a number of other groups that were dealing with the ESG-related issues, the World Economic Forum and others, they launched this natural asset company, which was then to list natural asset companies on the New York Stock Exchange, secure the rights to an environmental asset, launch an initial public offering, and then sell the environmental services. And we've been hearing about much of that today, but this has been in the works since the first days of the administration. New York Stock Exchange describes what the natural asset companies are. World Economic Forum describes that this is key to the future of investment, the natural asset company being a new type of ESG investment. And then they describe that they would secure an environmental asset, launch the initial public offering, and then sell the environmental benefits and you know, the financialization of nature. They estimate in many circles that this is a $4,000 trillion market to take these environmental assets and then sell them back, particularly where, as we heard from members of the delegation, it's required. It's actually part of the rule that you have to buy carbon offsets and credits. You have some of the largest companies in the world that are pushing and behind this effort. Well, the administration then in this did rulemaking last August to then put on the national books of account the natural assets of the country, and then the rulemaking led to the final rules in January, this national strategy to develop statistics for environmental economics, to track the condition of nature and its economic role and value, to quantify the immense value of this natural capital. And then we come to this rule. So now we have a rule that allows and requires this environmental leasing, potentially over hundreds of millions of acres, and as we heard from our delegation, to then take the asset and sell the environmental benefits, often being compelled, as we heard, that under the rule, the potential of compelling carbon credits and compelling the purchase of offsets. And so I think I just wanted to kind of walk through this and show this as maybe pulling some of the pieces together. We talk separately about issues of decarbonization and energy security. We talk separately about issues of protections on land and restrictions on land. We talk separately about ESG and social costs of greenhouse gas that were in executive orders. But if we come and tie this together, then there's a financialization aspect behind this that really could be driving this into a whole new area. At least that's what many of the companies that are driving and pushing behind the natural asset company, that there's a required restriction on land and energy. There's a tracking of the use of land and energy through the SEC and others. There's a required disclosure of greenhouse gas related emissions. And then now there's an asset base that requires a purchase of carbon credits. So just for the committee to be aware, I think that this is very serious, that the Director Johnson has mentioned and that the delegation has mentioned. These are things that have been in the works. If we track some of these things back from the very first day of the administration and the very first substantive executive order that he issued, that they use as the foundation and base for these various actions. So, Mr. Chair, no specific action on this, but I think hopefully this is one of the areas that the Director and the Attorney General's office, when we look at the coordination in the various areas where they're not following the rules, that this I would encourage that we look at this as perhaps the tip of the spear to look at the areas where the federal government is not coordinating and not dealing with the consistency to address this, because if these pieces fit together, and they seem to be going the same direction, this, I believe, is as serious to not only the way of life of our counties, but our way of life throughout Utah and even throughout the United States. So thank you for bringing this to our attention.
Okay,
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
let's jump over to Representative Romero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Ivory. Have we ever had somebody from the EPA or, you know, someone else talk about the federal government and kind of their perspective on this in this committee before? I mean, I'm new to the committee, so I'm learning. And so I think sometimes like balance is important to me, and you know, that's why I'm here. And I'm just kind of curious, because people can interpret things and think they're talking the same dialect, but they're not, you know, using the same dialect. And so I'm just curious, in the future, maybe when we have one of our commission meetings, if there's someone from the federal government that could talk to us about what their vision is on this, because I actually don't have a problem with environmental justice personally, because I represent an urban setting and I look at the asthma rates and I look at things that happen within my community. And so I don't want to paint everything as not helpful to our state or the people within our state. It depends on which region you live in also, or which part of the county you live in. Thanks.
Do you want to respond to that, Director?
Would you like me to respond to that? We have federal partners, I think, that we could invite to come and have some discussions with us on some of these issues. There's definitely a different take on what they're trying to do. On the environmental justice, I hear you. One of the frustrations that I've had with some of our federal partners is how we're defining that. You know, I see in rural areas that there isn't environmental justice because that doesn't qualify, because, you know, rural, but so that's a struggle. But I hear you when we're talking environmental justice in some of these areas. Absolutely, we need to take it serious and work with our tribes. And there's a lot of great work that the Lieutenant Governor is doing right now with our tribal partners and others in the legislature. And I think the relationships with our tribes have been better over the last year and a half or so than it's been in a long time, and we need to keep that up. And we need to do what we can with on environmental justice. It was enlightening to me when we were talking NEPA. So our office, together with 5 and 6 County, we do a congressional tour, and we bring back staffers, mostly from the East Coast and West Coast, who are Democrats, and we take them and show them the issues that we have here in the West, because getting them on the ground and explaining to them, we found is the best way to, if not get them on support of us, to at least not to oppose some of the work that we're trying to do. And one of the staffers came up to me and says, hey, you know, I hear you when we're talking NEPA and how it affects you negatively in your area, but recognize that in my area, he represented a very urban setting, and they had some issues with some polluting industries in his area. And he says, you know, NEPA means something different to us. It means this, right? It means how we're able to mitigate some of the impacts that we're dealing with. So how do we change NEPA to where we're not impacting you and doing good forest health and good forest management work, but not lose the protection? So that balance I agree with. We need to figure that out, and that's why I'm hoping we get some regulatory reform done around NEPA so that we can figure that one out. But yeah, be happy to meet with you and have those discussions about how we can move some of that forward.
Yeah, and thank you. My microphone's off. But again, I just want to emphasize that the way we all view the world, depending on where we live or where I was born in Tuella, Utah. You know, my grandfather and a lot of people he worked with, there was a lot of cancer there because of the work they did. So we know that we're all going to be impacted somehow by the environment. So I'm not saying one way is the right way, but I just want people to understand that the state of Utah is very diverse in whether you're in an urban or suburban or rural setting. So I understand all of that, and I just feel like sometimes it's this or that, and I just don't think that's the way how government should work. There's this thing called compromise that we need to do more of.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Looking at the clock, we still have a couple of items we need to be moving on. I think we need to go and ask for any public comment that we have on this item. Yeah, and so seeing that there's no comment online, nobody in the room, with that being said, I could go to Representative Ivory. You need to keep it really short.
I completely agree with my colleague to my right here, and hope she'll continue to be my colleague to the right. That we get voices in. We've made invitations to EPA, BLM, and others to come. We have had some from University of Utah and the environmental, I can't remember what his name was, but we've had them in, and absolutely, we look forward to having those questions and discussions. And again, that's the point, is to look at where should we make these decisions rather than what the director mentioned. In this situation, that we're not having any input in the decisions that have very tremendous impact to our state and to our economy.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to Co-Chair Stratton.
I think it'd be helpful to hear from the members of the commission at this point if there'd be a desire to have any communication from the commission on this proposed rule. I'll tell you what, go ahead.
Go ahead, Senator Hinkins.
Yeah, I would just like to remind everyone that we mentioned the Native Americans, but you got to realize the Ute tribe as well as the Navajo tribe is very dependent upon production of oil in our state. Most of the oil being produced in the Uinta Basin now is probably over 50% being produced on the reservation or on minerals that belongs to the Ute tribe, and they're very dependent upon this. And so they've actually got more at stake than the rest of us in the state of Utah. When it comes to, you talk about environmental issues, now they're regulated by the EPA rather than Department of Environmental Quality in the state of Utah, because the tribes fall under a different, and on the Navajo reservation, I believe it's under San Francisco, where the EPA out of San Francisco, where in Uinta County and Duchesne County, mostly Duchesne County, is regulated by the EPA out of Denver, or vice versa. But anyway, we got to remember that we need to check with them because they're the ones that are being impacted more by these environmental issues where they can't do production, and and we're going to hurt them worse than what we think by this. So we need to keep that in mind.
Well, thanks, Senator, and that's a good point. I mean, our tribes have been good partners with us, and what's good for them is most of the time good for the state of Utah, and we recognize their ability to work with the administration on these issues. Let's go to, Representative Albrecht.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would make a motion that we send a comment letter on this proposed rule, whether we do it in conjunction with PLIPCO and the governor's office or whether we do it on our own. Probably we should do one on our own and reference the other folks that are making comments from the state administration. But it's so important and affects just about everybody's livelihood one way or the other. We could get comments from the tribes, as Senator Hinkins mentioned, to include, or we could get comments from other folks that will be impacted by this proposed rule, and I mentioned those earlier.
Okay, thank you.
And we need to keep in mind, Mr. Chairman, that all people are going to be impacted with the price of fuel. I know that we're all hoping to eventually to go to electric vehicles, but that's way down the road yet for everybody to be able to be utilized on electric vehicles. But prices of fuel now, I just came from Gillette, Wyoming, and in Wyoming, their gas is about $3.34, and you hit Colorado, and they're about $3.70, and you hit Utah, we're over $4, and so we're being heavily more impacted than maybe other states. It looks like, and you go to California, and it's back up to $5 and maybe even $6 for fuel. So and Nevada was almost as high as California when I went there last weekend. So we're all going to be impacted, and especially our constituents.
Yeah.
And all they're doing is making, with the tribes being able to, if they start shutting down the production of fuel, that's going to cut into their ability to be dependent or sufficient dependent. It'll make them more dependent on the government if they are not able to extract their own oil and gas off to fill their coffers on. So we need to keep that in mind that, they're trying to be self-sufficient, and we need to support them as much as possible to do that.
Thank you. Let's go over to Senator Kwan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I see online, so I have a question, if that's okay, Mr. Chair. I think I see online that June 20th is the date by which the comments need to be in. Okay. So I don't have enough information to vote yes on this motion. I'm still trying to catch up. And representing the area that I do here in the urban setting, it's just looking at it at face value. I cannot support what I think might the comment, our letter be, but the thing is that I can't support something I don't see. So I'm reticent to support that motion as of now. Just because, again, I don't feel I have enough information on this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's go back. We do have a motion on the table. Let's talk, or let's go for a vote on, the motion is to have the commission write a letter of support or comments for this issue on conservation and landscape health. That's the question before us, so all those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we've got, okay, let's go to Representative Romero.
Mr. Chair, so this obviously passed out, with 2 nays, and will the commission members that voted yay sign their name, and then our names just not be on it because, or what is the process regarding the letter?
I can answer. Representative Stratton.
So what it would be is first of all, to formally send a letter out, we may need to get Legislative Management Committee's approval. The question is if it would not be stated as being unanimous unless it is, but it would come from the chairs. The 2 chairs would sign it in representing the voice of the commission.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, because in our caucus, when we don't all stand united, because there are times we don't, we just sign the names of the representatives that are supporting the statement. So I just wanted that clarification. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Senator Kwan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to ask if the secretary could read the actual motion because I got a little confused with how it was worded.
Okay. The motion, and Representative Ulbert could correct me, but it is to have the commission write a letter with comments on this topic for the BLM to review. Let's see. Bureau of Land, let's see. A response letter to the Bureau of Land Management providing comments about the proposed rule change is what the letter would be in regards to. So,
I would say, not to further, I would say, for example, Ms. Balone has recommended that we talk about the fact that there's not a meeting in Utah on this. Mr. LaCroix has talked about the challenge with public land users being then forced to pay for access. We have several things that our director has talked about. So those would be part of the things that are included in the response. It's what it is. It's a response when a rule is proposed. There's given an opportunity for public comment on it, and it's us not us, but the Federalism Commission, which its charge is to interact with our federal counterparts and agencies and so forth. I think that this motion is directly in line with what our statutory charge is to do. As long as we have a motion approved by the committee, then the chairs will act upon that and move forward. So that's what I would just add.
Okay, we need to back up and do a roll call on this, since we had some yays, so go ahead and do the roll call vote on the motion.
Senators Hinkins,
Aye.
Kwan, Owens,
Aye.
Representatives Albrecht,
Yes.
Ivory, Romero, and Chairs Stratton
Aye.
and Chair Winterton.
Aye. Okay, so we have Senator Kwan and Representative Romero as nays. The rest are yays for the motion. So we'll work with staff and get a letter in response to this. Let's see. We're very short on time, and we got a couple of other topics. Maybe we could briefly address those, and then if we need to put them on further agendas, we'll do that. So
Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
we got Article 5 issues. Item number 7, we've got Representative Ivory and David Walker, who's the former Comptroller General of the United States, and Dan Burton from our Attorney General's office. If we could briefly address this and then see if we need to take it up on a future agenda, we will. Representative Ivory?
Yeah, I just think if David Walker's online, we just let him.
I am. I'm on the
take
line.
the issue. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Can you hear me, Ken?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, I'll go. All right. I'm Dave Walker. I'm coming to you from Washington. I'm the immediate former Comptroller General of the United States, which in English is Auditor General, the Chief Accountability Officer of the United States. As you know, this week, there's a tentative agreement on a debt ceiling agreement. There are pros and cons to that debt ceiling agreement, but obviously we don't want to default. But here's the key point that relates to Article 5. There's nothing in that agreement that deals with the structural imbalance between projected spending and revenues. And in addition to that, there's nothing in that agreement that would place a restraint on current and future Congresses about the tremendous growth in the size and scope of the federal government, federal spending. Bottom line, the federal government's grown too big, promised too much, subsidized too many, and has undercut states' rights dramatically. And so therefore, one of the things that Representative Ivory, I, and a small group of knowledgeable people with various high-level positions in the past in the federal government are pursuing is an Article 5 convention of states for the purpose of proposing a single fiscal responsibility amendment that would probably focus on debt to GDP, but ultimately to be decided. We found out that 39 states had active applications, including Utah in 1979. You only need 34, and Congress did nothing. So we have efforts underway, both in the Congress to raise the visibility of this. With light comes heat, with heat hopefully comes action. We also have efforts underway to try to get one or more states' attorney general to file suit against the Congress for their failure to call the convention as expressly required under Article 5 of the Constitution, and to put this in the hands of the states. We have a state, which I cannot mention, whose governor and attorney general have said that they're willing to pursue this, but they don't want to go alone. And so we're looking for other states to join this effort to assert states' rights, to constrain the growth and the size and scope of the federal government and federal spending. And we'd like Utah to be one of them. We have engaged a very prominent and experienced attorney here in Washington with a very positive track record before the Supreme Court to draft a mandamus action at our expense. And so therefore we're taking that on. Again, This is the only way we're going to constrain the future growth of the size and scope of the federal government. The states are going to have to assert themselves. We'd like for Utah to be part of it, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. All right. We do have Dan Burton here from the AG's office, and I don't know if it's premature or anything, whether you take orders from the commission or...
Well, we know that that's not the case.
Dan Burton, Utah Attorney General's office. We have had several meetings with former comptroller David Walker, as well as others in this space, and we are looking at their materials. We find it very interesting, and we think there's some potential here. But it is premature, and so I don't want to count the chickens before they've hatched.
Okay, let's go back over to Representative Ivory.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then with Dan, we've kind of talked about this a little bit, that perhaps even the legislature may have standing to bring this kind of action on its own, perhaps. And, you know, that discussion is kind of live as well. And we've had some discussions with the executive branch. And again, these are all just discussions about reviewing this. But if we think about what Mr. Walker said, so under the Constitution, if 2/3 of the states apply to have a convention of states, then Congress has to call and name the time and place. And so Mr. Walker and others have reviewed all of the applications that have ever been filed. And in 1979, we got the ball across the goal line. The states did, but the Congress didn't put the points on the board. And that's really what this is talking about. And so the question is, do we join in an action to compel, which is what a mandamus action would be, compel Congress constitutionally to name the time and place for a convention? That there were 39 applications. There were more than 34 live applications for several decades. And Congress is not even counting the applications, therefore not making the call. So the question and the discussion is with legislature, with the Attorney General's office, but perhaps with the governor, to coordinate with this other eastern state on maybe us, among others, actually moving this action forward. I think it would be good to see the brief that this DC attorney is preparing. But Dan, I don't know if you have any thoughts on what a collaboration like that, what would the review, what would we need to review, look at to even have enough information to make the decision to move forward? Your thoughts on that, if you would.
Sure. Representative Ivory, I think his point is well received. I think you have, as a legislature, a strong nexus with this kind of action, right? If the legislature is bringing the potential amendment, then they have a reason to come and force that mandamus, to force that action in Congress. It is a political action, and so the more bodies that are involved, the more parties that are involved, the more it's going to have impetus. The governor, the legislature, the AG's office, federal delegation. As you get those involved, I think you have more impetus to move this across the finish line.
If there's any questions for Mr. Walker, I would simply propose that as a matter of action that we request and ask our chairs when they meet with the Executive Appropriations Committee to raise this issue. I would say gather the information and then raise the issue with the Executive Appropriations Committee, and then perhaps continue the discussions with the Attorney General's office and the Governor's office about looking at joining with this eastern state. This is a matter of very, very serious constitutional moment. We're in a fiscal place where, even though they may have solved the debt ceiling, interest has now surpassed defense spending. Interest is the fastest growing item in the federal budget. It's going to crowd out everything. There are estimates that by 2028, just the interest on the debt is $1 trillion a year, and that's if rates don't change. And so this ends up crowding out money to the most vulnerable in Utah and the 30% of our budget that's federal spending. And it's pretty clear that Washington's not going to have a V8 and have that moment that they should have taken care of this. And for the states to get together, it's a very serious constitutional moment, and we have the opportunity to move that conversation forward. So I would recommend we authorize the chairs to move that up to EAC and that we recommend continuing the exploration of the action with Mr. Walker and with these eastern states.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to Co-Chair Stratton.
Chair, Co-Chair, I'm not sure if that was a motion that Representative Ivory was making, but I do have, if it was a motion, I have some discussion and a question to Mr. Walker, if that's in.
No,
let me
that's
just
appropriate.
take proper order. Mr. Walker, you, as controller or comptroller of the General of the United States, you've been appointed by just Republicans or just Democrats, or can you describe that
Both.
way? Both.
Both. I've run two federal agencies in the executive branch, in which case I was appointed by President Reagan. I've been a trustee of Social Security and Medicare. I was appointed by George Herbert Walker Bush, and I served as Comptroller General of the United States, and I was appointed by William Jefferson Clinton. I have served in positions in government, many positions over the years. I currently serve as a member of the Defense Business Board under the current administration. And so I have a strong track record of being professional, objective, fact-based, nonpartisan, non-ideological, non-personal, just the facts.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to just point out to each of us on the commission here, the voice that we're hearing from. Let me ask you this question. We have currently about 25% of our total federal budget is discretionary. Is that correct? In other words,
less than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's one of the challenges. An Article 5, the way you're working on that is you're wanting to, the group you're working with, you're saying, let's get an Article 5 convention together and propose an amendment, then have the states approve it. Is there a way to do that from your perspective in reverse, and otherwise have the amendment that the states would propose passed by 38 states without an Article 5 amendment? Do you have that much motivation, support, do you think?
Well, Mr. Co-Chair, let me clarify one thing. Less than 30% of the budget is discretionary, and that's being squeezed.
Thank you.
There's only two ways to get an amendment to the Constitution under Article 5. The old-fashioned way, 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate pass a proposed amendment. They send it to the states, 3/4 have to ratify. The second is a convention of states to propose amendments, not to rewrite the Constitution, to propose one or more amendments. And the way Article 5 reads is if 34 states file an application for a convention to propose one or more amendments, then Congress shall call that. It's ministerial, it's non-discretionary, it's express, it's enumerated. Candidly, you know as well as I do that Congress, there's certain things it doesn't want to do. It doesn't want to control spending. It doesn't want term limits. It doesn't want campaign finance reform. And so the easiest way for them to bypass it is don't count these applications, and they need to be held accountable. And I think the numbers speak loudly that Washington is just out of touch and out of control. And keep in mind this: when the crunch comes, if we have a fiscal crisis, bad news flows downhill, and states are downhill, and citizens are downhill.
I appreciate and I understand, and certainly what I had proposed is not the laid out path in the Constitution, but getting to a 2/3 vote in the House and the Senate at the federal level may be strengthened by, as part of this motion, Representative Ivory, you're talking about, just include that we would propose a specific language that could be passed as a state.
On that, Mr. Co-Chair, ultimately, the decision will be based upon the delegates to the convention. I will tell you that I and others have come up with illustrative potential amendments. And I think it's fine to do that, but constitutional scholars will tell you that you can't force the Convention of States to limit its discussion to specific language on a proposed amendment. You can provide them with examples or recommendations, if you will, but ultimately that deliberative body has to make the decision. What you can do, and this is what we pursue, is to make sure that a majority of the state applications are for a single subject. That's what we've done, fiscal responsibility only, which will prevent a runaway convention, which will force the convention to focus on this single subject.
Thank you.
Okay. Representative Ivory.
Yeah, I appreciate the clarification the chair brought up. I think step one, we're even a number of steps back from convening or deciding, or we're at the point that Congress isn't even counting. And that's really the question here. So the first step would be an action to have our congressional partners actually receive and count and archive applications. That's not even happening now. So I think that's the first step in the discussion. And then were the court to mandate that the states then convene, then we're into those discussions. But I'm glad you brought that up, because in August 2nd to 4th is the second simulated convention of states. And I would hope that our commission would meet sometime between now and the first part of August. We have 3 delegates from the state of Utah that have been called to that simulated convention of states. And Mr. Chairman, I think we should do that very thing. I think we should discuss for that simulation the types of amendments that Utah would want to see discussed and moved in a simulated convention. I think that's a wonderful, very necessary thing that we should do between now and the 1st of August. In the meantime, with this, I think it's having the chairs move with EAC, with the Attorney General's office, with the Governor's office, to discuss how we might get enough information, decide to move with this other eastern state, and then perhaps encourage other states to move with us in this very singular, I think unprecedented action to get the states, to get Congress to count the applications and convene as a state to discuss the very thing that you brought up.
You know, if I think back, it's been 3 or 4 years ago that the state passed an article, or you know, but I don't know that it was a single source. So how long do these things stay good? You know, we talked in '79 that we had 34 or 38 states on board, and now we're still struggling to get them to call one. So does it have to be a single source for the convention, or multiple?
That's a great question, Mr. Chair. Currently, Utah has a single source fiscal responsibility application that we've sent to Congress that apparently they're not counting and archiving. We also have an application to discuss 3 things at a convention. One would be fiscal responsibility, so it includes that, term limits for federal officers, and then also the scope of the federal jurisdiction. And that one's called the Convention of States Project. I think that has 19 states now that have applied for that discussion. So there are 2 discussions that we've applied for as a state, the fiscal responsibility and that Convention of State Project. There's a term limit application that's a single subject that will probably be coming next year. Also, as a state, we've passed legislation to, it's called the Delegate Limitation Act, to restrict our delegates from dealing with issues outside of any call of a convention. So we've passed, and I think about 14 or 15 other states have passed legislation that the delegates they send to a convention, it would be unlawful, unauthorized for them to discuss and take action on any matters outside the call.
Okay. All right. Well, moving on then, desire of the commission or any action that we want to do, or just take it up on a future? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I would make that as a motion. If you want me to, I would just move that we have the chairs move this issue forward with the EAC, with the Attorney General's office and the governor, to forward this discussion with the other states that are exploring this.
I think instead of the EAC, it'd be LMC.
Right? No, that's correct.
But we could do that, yes. One thing, before we take any kind of action here, is let's back up. Is there public comment on this? You know, I receive many emails urging us to convene a convention. And so I know there's interest in the public there, but don't see anybody online, nobody in the room here. So let's go back to your motion then. And if I heard right, is that we would encourage the chairs to take this up with the LMC and see their desire if we want to push this forward as a resolution or something in the upcoming session.
Yeah, I would include Attorney General's office and Governor, and just to work with these other states that have, Mr. Walker suggested there's an eastern state that is ready to take action, that we would have the chairs work with LMC, the Attorney General's office, the Governor's office, to coordinate with that other state and explore potential action on this mandamus concept.
I do have a question to the motion, and Mr. Walker said that there is another state, a governor and an AG that's willing to do it, but they don't want to do it alone. At some point, there's going to have to be some coordination between a willing state and the state that wants to take the lead. Is that, how are we going to accommodate that? Mr. Walker? Or
Well,
Mr.
yeah.
Bagri?
There is a state in the east, which I won't name, who is prepared to take the lead on mandamus action. They don't want to go alone. However, it would be a partnership effort. And the group, so yeah, what I would expect would happen, Mr. Co-Chair, is that once they get at least one more state who says, yes, we're with you, then there'll probably be many other states that will join. Because, you know, there are over 30 states that have an interest in this and have already, you know, filed applications on this subject matter. And so I would imagine it would be, somebody's got to step out and say, I'll go, but there'll be quite a few other states joining, and it'll be a collaborative effort.
Very good. My point is Utah can't lead on everything. We've got to have some support, and hopefully there's
You know, I would say, Mr. Chair, to that, what an amazing opportunity. We've just authorized $500,000 to move litigation. We've authorized millions of dollars on other things to move litigation. This is a private group that have somehow come up with the funds to then draft, to have a very top Supreme Court attorney draft what a petition of mandamus would look like. And we don't have to move to spend money at this point, and I think we're really just talking about moving the discussion. And then the point that you raise, I think, is very valid in that discussion. Perhaps that eastern state leads, perhaps we lead, perhaps some other state. But I think to continue that discussion is of really, I think, very serious constitutional moment.
Okay, Senator Hinkins, you have your hand up.
Yes, my question is, Mr. Walker, he seems to be pretty informed of what goes on and stuff. I was just curious, we talk about our interest being more than our national security budget. Who does that money go to? Does it go back to pay money interest into our Social Security? Do they borrow from that and then are paying it back in interest, or is it other countries, or is it American Express, or is it banks? I'm just curious somebody's ox is going to get gored here when we start taking, because we're borrowing like drunken sailors. And I'm just curious where this money goes to. It's got to be going to somebody that's, and everybody seems to be supportive of it. Everybody in Congress and the Senate and the president all seem to be in support of spending all this money, and it's going to somebody. And I'm just curious, where does it end up at? I mean, have we got 1 million people that we're borrowing from, or is it to One Pacific, the World Bank, or what's the deal?
There's two kinds of interest. There's interest on trust fund securities. Those are securities that are held by the Social Security, Medicare trust funds, highway trust funds, et cetera. So to the extent that those trust funds, put them in quotes, hold bonds, then the interest goes to those programs. But most of the interest goes to what's called debt held by the public, which includes pension funds, includes individuals, it includes China, Japan, Saudi Arabia, and a number of other oil exporting companies. Unlike Japan, which has a much higher debt to GDP than we do, but very stagnant economic growth, very little improvement in their equity markets over the last 2 to 3 decades. The Japanese save. So most of the debt for the Japanese is held by Japanese citizens. That's not the case for the United States. We have a low savings rate. We're relying upon others to finance a lot of our debt. And unfortunately, we have not only high debt levels at the federal level, we have high consumer debt levels as well. So we're doing the opposite of what you need to do to create a better future. By the way, the people that are involved in this, you know, myself, I'm former Comptroller General of the United States, former Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. These are very high-level people, and we have 2 things that we care about: our country and our grandkids. That's why we're in this fight, because the future of our country and the future of our grandkids are at risk.
Thank you. Senator Kwan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have some questions, if that's okay. You had mentioned, Mr. Chair, that we passed I think it was the Convention of States campaign, a bill a few years ago that's maybe not quite as narrowly focused as we're talking about here. But I wonder if those 28 states that have passed these kinds of bills, are they also not narrowly focused?
Could you answer
I
that,
can
Mr.
answer
Walker?
that.
Okay.
Yeah. In 1979, there were 39 active applications, including Utah. Of those 39, 30 were for fiscal responsibility only. 9 were plenary, which means we want the states to get together to talk about the possibility of 1 or more amendments. Importantly, 39 is obviously more than the 34 requirement, and 30 is more than a majority of states. And therefore, that means you call the convention, but you have the ability to limit the scope of the convention since it's 1 state, 1 vote. You know, Utah gets the same vote that California and New York do, all right? In 1983, we actually reached a peak of 42 states, and 32 were fiscal responsibility only. And so we've crossed the goal line. We've taken appropriate steps to try to limit the scope of the convention to make sure it doesn't, quote unquote, run away. And in fact, that's the biggest argument against multi-subject conventions. As was mentioned, the Convention of States has, I think, about 19 states. That's a long way from 34, and they're not likely to get to 34 because the biggest argument against a Convention of States is it'll address too many issues. We want to deal with the most important issue first, which is putting our federal finances in order. We can prove the concept that this approach will work. And then if people want to use it for other things, whether it be term limits or limiting the size and scope of the federal government or whatever, then they can. But our view is first things first.
Mr. Chair, if I may, so that is part of my reticence again. Here we go again with that word, because it just sounds very confusing. There's a lot of states who want to do a lot of different things. And I do understand that we could limit it that, but we can have 50 states with 50 different opinions and ideas. And by the way, that's not just on the right, it's also on the left, right? Because we've seen lots of conversations about ERA coming through an Article 5 convention. So this is, it just sounds very expensive to me in the long run, and I'm just wondering with the motion that's on the table, to push forward the discussion. Can't ledge management do that on their own? I mean, we couldn't, the chair perhaps say, hey, we talked about this and it's of interest?
You're right, we could. We could just move the conversation along without having any formal action. And yet, I think the motion is that we have that conversation, not be passive and just, well, if we remember, we will. So.
Well, I bet I know how the vote will go. But I just think that the discussion, because we already did have the bill that had passed in previous years, and perhaps it's another bill that limits the discussion for Utah. I just feel that this motion that's on the table is unnecessary, and I think it's going to be expensive. I mean, we just put $500,000 more for some litigation that we took a vote on many years ago, right? And I just think it's going to continue to be expensive. But thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to voice that.
If I understand this right, it doesn't cost us anything at this point.
Now. You're right.
It's to put it there. Once the convention moves forward, then you start probably getting out the checkbook. But
thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair,
yes.
for a second, you're correct. There's no cost to the state as of now. We're funding the cost of drafting the mandate. I fully expect that if Utah decides to join, there'll be many other states that decide to join. To the extent there's additional costs, it'll be shared among a number of different states. And here's the issue. The issue is Utah and many other states have done what they're required to do under Article 5. And the Congress is ignoring your actions. They are intentionally ignoring your actions. If they do it on this, they can do it on a lot of other things. And the difference is that the founders were very smart. They knew that Washington might become so out of touch and out of control, or that there could be certain issues where they had a fundamental conflict of interest, like controlling spending, like term limits, like campaign finance, that the states needed an ability to assert their rights under the Constitution. And that's what this is all about. Washington is out of touch and out of control. They're ignoring the requests of the states. The states need to rise up and assert their rights as the founders intended.
Thank you. Representative Ivory.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I really appreciate the questions and the discussion. I had the opportunity to present an academy of states on Article 5 with my good friend from Massachusetts, Representative Carmine Gentile. And ideologically, we're probably on opposite ends of the spectrum. But on Article 5, we agree. And there are people across the spectrum that have come together on issues that there really is no way that we organize that decision-making power for the states other than through Article 5. I had the opportunity to ask him that very question that the senator posed. You know, what about other states and other issues? And I posed the question, what if we had a convention on fiscal responsibility, for example, and someone came up with a proposal to do away with the Second Amendment in the convention? And he just laughed uncontrollably. He said, that could never happen. He says, the discussion is limited to the call. When you have the call of the convention, just kind of like our committee, our discussion is limited to federalism. He says the discussion is limited to the call. And so there are Article 5 movements literally across the spectrum. Campaign finance on the left, term limits probably kind of in the middle. Fiscal responsibility draws people from all sides. Erskine Bowles, who was the chief of staff for President Clinton, said that debts and deficits are a cancer that are going to destroy the nation from within. And Mr. Walker mentioned Bill Owens. I just conclude with this, Mr. Chairman. We had a meeting with the Attorney General a few weeks ago, and Admiral Owens, who was the vice chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under President Clinton, was in the meeting, and he kept using the term that the debt, the deficit, the de-dollarization is a threat to national security. And I had a chance in the meeting to ask him, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, if you could rank the threat that the fiscal irresponsibility is, where would that be? And he said, it's one of the top 2. I said, well, what would the other one be? He said, well, the other one's China. I mean, they're actually out directly, but debt deficit de-dollarization is among the top two threats of national security to our nation. And so, again, all we're talking about here is, do we have Congress actually count and archive applications that we go to great lengths to submit? Right now, they're not even doing that. And as Mr. Walker said, if they're not even taking that step, then how do we do anything in state government that maintains roles and responsibilities? I would say that the inflation cost that we've talked about so much is directly related to not having controls and the opportunity we have to put fiscal controls. I think the constitutional cost is tremendous if Congress won't even follow something that directly spelled out in the Constitution. But I think the real cost is future going forward. We are putting on the credit card of the future $2 trillion a year. We're overspending $2 trillion a year and just putting that on the credit card of the future, saying they'll pay for that. And we have the power to actually do something. I don't think we could then point our finger at Washington anymore and say they're not doing their job, either party, both parties, because we have the power to actually do something about it. So anyway, with that, I would submit the motion that we have the chairs move this discussion forward to then bring back for consideration of future action.
All right, I will take that as a summation, but just a second. Senator Hinkin's been online with his hand up for a while. I'm going to recognize him so we don't forget. So, Senator?
I just got the big question I have is, do we decide what they're going to spend it on? Because we know what they're going to do. Yeah, they'll cut the budget, but they'll go in and close our parks down like they did before, things that brings the public in an uproar. But yet we're still going to fund other countries. We're going to give money away to everybody else. But yet we're going to knife our own citizens and their things that impact us. That's where they're going to do it. I mean, we've been paying for national defense. He meant Mr. Walker we've been defending Japan and Germany since the wars ended. We've been paying for their. How could they be broke? We're the ones we are broke. But I don't know. I just don't understand how they could owe more than we do when we've been paying for all their national defense. And so, are we going to be able to limit these people of what they can spend the money on? Because it's probably not going to be what we want them to limit it on. It's going to be the stuff that's going to impact our citizens and our people that's dependent upon it for welfare and for their livelihoods and different things. But it seems like they just keep supporting other places in the world. Anyway, I just want to know if there's any way we can limit what they do with the money.
If I may just quickly, Mr. Chair. The beauty of this, if we do get to a convention of states on this, Senator, then the states have the ability to control what happens, where the fiscal responsibility, how that would move forward. As it stands now, we're going to be acted upon. We cannot keep spending money we don't have forever. China is working to undercut the dollar and take that ability away. So the only way we get to what you're talking about is if the states exercise this power and then we have some ability to create the type of amendment that would do that. But otherwise, you're right. It's all going to flow directly down to us, and the states are going to have to just deal with the fallout. But we could either act on that or we just wait and be acted upon. But this allows us to be active and be the mobilizing factor in that discussion.
Okay. Representative Roman.
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, I just want clarification. We're talking about Article 5 issues because we're the Federalism Commission, correct? Is there we're specifically talking about the budget, or what specifically are we talking about? Because what I was heard from Senator Kwan and Representative Ivory, that there's different takes you can take on this. So I'm just curious what we're asked to be voted on. And if you could just lay it out to me, Representative Ivory, before we talk about your motion.
Okay, let's go to Co-Chair Stratton.
Thank you, Representative. You're correct in that this, we've been talking about the whole Article 5 and because of federalism. This commission is a compilation of 3 prior commissions: the Commission on Public Lands, the Fiscal Responsibility Commission, and the Federal Commission. It had a different terminology. So this, what the motion is encouraging legislative management, which you're a part of, Representative and Senator. You're both part of that, as I understand it, right? Senator, you part of the Legislative Management Committee? So no, okay. So, Representative, you're part of that committee. Recommend that they consider joining a push to have Congress count the votes, in most simple, count the votes and issue a call to convention. That's the bottom line of what we're talking about here. Is that correct, Representative Ivey? Do you want to say anything else? Okay, great. So, Chair?
All right. Not to belabor this any further, let's just call for a roll call vote on the motion on Article. Okay, there you go.
Senators Hinkins,
Aye.
Juan, Owens,
Aye.
Representatives Albrecht,
Aye.
Ivory, Romero, Chair Stratton,
Aye.
and Chair Winterton.
Aye. Okay, again, this is a 6-2 vote with Quan and Romero against it. So we'll take that up with the LMC then. And we're going to turn the last couple of items on the agenda over to Co-Chair Stratton.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to, given the fact that we're past our meeting time, thank you for staying here, but if you'll give me 5 minutes, I'm going to sum these next 2, maybe 5 minutes or less, and then take questions. The Federalism Commission plan is, when we began our 2022, we had several items that we were going to work on as a commission. And given the role that we each play on the commission with different perspectives, it helps create a better outcome. What we would like to do at this point, rather than begin a discussion, is if each of you that have issues, if you could respond to a request by the staff on specific issues you'd like to have discussed. And I'd love to hear from both sides of the aisle on this, on things that you'd like to work together on, what that would be. If I think I would hope that we all have a sense, maybe at different levels, that federalism does make sense, that the states shouldn't do everything, that the federal government shouldn't do everything. That's the principles that we're talking about here. At its foundation, federalism. Like to, if you'd respond to that, and then also, as part of that, the pattern and cadence for our meetings, the future meetings. If there may be a off-capital site visit that we could be engaged in. For example, if by some chance the BLM decides to hold a public meeting, we may want to have our meeting, we could have our commission meeting on that same day in the same location, and then we could all be there to comment if that avails itself. As an example, that's just an example based on what we've talked about today. So 8 and 9, we'd want to have some interaction individually with you. My sense is on 9, our future meetings, that we'd probably likely prefer to have it during our interim week of the month, either maybe on a Monday. I'm thinking of those that are online that have to travel, maybe a Monday afternoon meeting would work so that they would be, they have to come and generally stay Tuesday, or a Friday morning meeting or a Thursday afternoon. So if you respond to the questions in the coming weeks, we'll deal with those 2 agenda items that way. I think there might be a question, Chair.
We got the good representative from Central Utah. He's had his hand up. Go ahead, Carl.
In the interest of time, I agree with Chair Stratton. I've got 2 or 3 items. who would you like us to send those to? The chairs or Nathan or who for future agenda?
Yes, our policy analyst, Nathan Brady, would be the one to send them to. And so it's also the cadence for when we meet and also the issues, and then we'll get them decided upon. Thank you.
Steph's telling me that.
Happy to host this commission in Richfield, at Snow College, Richfield, anytime. We're surrounded by lots of government land.
Lots of federal issues. Okay, very good.
All right.
Thank you for the offer
Staff
there.
tells me that they'll send out an email after this, and so you could respond back to that one. Okay, Representative Romero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are you talking about this June intra meeting, or are you talking about intra meetings after?
Study items throughout interim here.
Okay, but our next meeting, are you talking about having another one in June?
We generally would have one in June,
Okay.
August, September, each monthly meeting.
We can hold up to
Okay,
9 a
perfect.
year.
Okay. I might have to just let you know I'll be online because I'll be in your favorite place, Washington DC, during interim. So just let me know when you're doing it.
Maybe we need to go to DC as a commission. We could do that as well.
You can be with me and talk about reproductive rights, but
You
I'll
get
we'll
us-
be on the same page.
You get us into the president, we will all be there. So how's that?
I will be at the White House, but not for this issue.
Okay. Any further comments or discussion from the commission? Seeing none then, I'd entertain one more motion.
Let's see if we can come up with a motion we can agree on.
Okay. Senator Kwan's got a motion to adjourn. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? It's not debatable,
We
so
tried.
it passes. Okay. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.